we can start. Thank you so much. And that way it'll allow folks to enter the room. I am so excited for this conversation and webinar with Dr. Tama Bryant on cultivating joy as a sacred practice of resistance. It's going to be wonderful. This is part of the Society of Counseling Psychology, their Justice and Joy initiative. Feel free to check out our website and Linktree for more information about April activities that are coming up. In April, we are celebrating the healing properties of joy, exploring the ways to cultivate joy among youth, families, and communities. Joy is crucial to as it embraces personal and collective practices, as it affirms our humanity. It provides meaning and resistance and connection at a point of time in which there is so much uncertainty, violence, and pain. Before I introduce Dr. Bryant, I just want to let you folks know that this is eligible for one psychology continuing education credit. There's a couple of things that are important. You must attend the entire webinar via computer, laptop, tablet, but not phone. For some reason, the phone doesn't work. We're not able to kind of track that. You will receive an evaluation of the event within 3 weeks. So sometimes folks want to let us know that when can they get their CE a day or two after the event. So if you can be patient, and within 3 weeks, you should receive something. And once the evaluation is completed, you will receive information about how to get that CE credit. Without further ado, let me just introduce Dr. Tama Bryant, who is fabulous and a perfect way to start off our conversation on joy. Dr. Bryant was the 2023 president of the American Psychological Association. She completed her doctorate in clinical psychology at Duke University and her postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical Center's Victims of Violence program. Upon completing and graduating, she became a coordinator of the Princeton University SHARE program, which provides intervention and prevention programming to combat sexual assault, sexual harassment, and harassment based on sexual orientation. She's currently a tenured professor of psychology in the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University, where she directs the Culture and Trauma Research Laboratory. Her clinical and research interests center on interpersonal trauma and the societal trauma of oppression. She is a past president of the Society of the Psychology of Women and a past APA representative to the United Nations. Dr. Tama also served on the APA Committee on International Relations and Psychology and the Committee on Women in Psychology. She is just amazing, has done so much. She has been honored in the field for a range of stuff. So for example, the American Psychological Association has honored her for her distinguished early career contributions to psychology and the public interest. The Institute of Violence, Abuse, and Trauma honored her work in their media award for the film Psychology of Human Trafficking. She's also received the Donald Friedley Memorial Award for Excellence in Mentoring, which I'm not at all surprised by, in the field of trauma. The California Psych Association honored her for distinguished scientific achievement in psychology. She's also the editor of a number of texts, including Multicultural Feminist Therapy, Helping Adolescent Girls and Color to Thrive, author of award-winning books. I could go on and on. She's also served to raise public awareness regarding mental health by extending the reach of psychology beyond the academy and private therapy office through community programming and media engagement, including but not limited to Headline News, National Public Radio, CNN. It is an honor to welcome Dr. Bryant. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I want to celebrate and salute you on your presidency. And thank you for this vision of justice and joy, and for this webinar in particular. I am so appreciative of your team that has been working to make this happen. And for all of you who are here live, as well as those who will get to see the recording. And so I want to start as we think about cultivating joy with a song that I learned in Botswana. And it simply says, and I'll try to sign it too, we are one family and none can separate us. None can separate us. None can separate us. We are one family and none can separate us. No, no, never. And I want to remind you on today that you are not alone. That even in these webinars and in these boxes, and we even with your camera off, we can sometimes feel like we're carrying the weight of our worlds on our shoulders. And the ways in which we get through all of this is collectively. And so I want to invite you to take breath with me and to take breath with all of us, inhaling in through your nose and exhaling out through your mouth. That there are those who are present on today who are hoping with you, praying with you, excited for you and for all of us to get to the next chapter, to outlast our present circumstance and to get to the next, where we can hopefully build something safer and more just and more joyful for all of us. And so I will share my screen. Let us think about cultivating joy as a sacred practice of resistance. And cultivating is a key word because it implies that we have a decision to make, that we have a role to play, that my joy is not something passively that comes upon me, but it is something I am intentional about. And those that we work with in terms of our clients, our students, our research participants, those we consult with, to help people become empowered about the decisions that they make in their thoughts, in their emotions, in their behaviors, in their spirits, because it is a sacred practice, that there is something deeper and wider than the surface. And we understand that the study of psychology in its original languaging is the study of the soul. So as we consider the study of the soul, that we want to purposefully, intentionally build our joy. And we know that is in resistance to all of the challenges that would deplete our joys. And so I'm glad that something about this topic spoke to you and that we are collectively building something. It is important for me to share my positionality, and I would like to start by saying I am speaking today from what you would often hear as Los Angeles. It is the land that has been cultivated by the Tongva peoples and other indigenous peoples who have a joyful relationship with the land and with culture. I want to also give labor acknowledgement as a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade, that there are many people who have experienced exploited labor historically and in present times. And we want to be mindful and thoughtful about their labor, and at the same time, to see them in the fullness of their humanity, which includes joy. It is a joy that is in spite of the exploitation, a joy that is in spite of the tribulation. And so we honor the fullness of others' humanity and the fullness of our own. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a woman of African descent. And along with being a psychology professor, researcher, practitioner, consultant, I am also a sacred dancer. a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, an activist, a poet. And I choose to decolonize our assumptions around professionalism that would say you have to be a blank slate or a cookie cutter, that you have to leave yourself in the margins. And I tell our students at Pepperdine University, if you get to commencement and you have left yourself behind, we have robbed you. We need the fullness of each other's presence. That is the way in which we combat silencing, and that is also the way in which we combat tokenism. Tokenism is when people want your face and the place, but not your joy and not your justice and not your narrative. When people don't want the table or the institution to shift, that is a colonized perspective. And so we want to be intentional about showing up with our whole selves. And when I show up as my whole self, that is not to silence your whole self, but to activate within you a permission that you give yourself to show up fully and authentically. I want to say, even as we are meeting about justice and joy, that context matters. And we are seeing a lot of injustice around the globe, and we are experiencing so many things that create for us sorrow and grief and the realities of oppression. And so this joy we're speaking about is not a joy of erasure. It is not a joy that is based in being naive. It is not a joy that is based on keeping our eyes closed, but instead with our eyes wide open as we feel and recognize the human hearts that are aching, including our own, that we still remain intentional about creating joyful paths for ourselves and for others. And so recognizing that many of us, most of us, are in a place of exhaustion, and many of us and most of us are in a place of grieving something and someone, and a collective grief and loss. I want to start with a compassion hold. And from a trauma-informed perspective, everything I am offering is by invitation. So if it aligns with you, you can come along. If it does not align with you, then you get to choose. That's agency, and that's what it means in part to be trauma-informed. So I invite you, if it aligns with you, to join me with this compassion hold of one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly, inhaling in through your nose, exhaling out through your mouth. One hand on your heart, one hand on your forehead, inhaling in through your nose, exhaling out through your mouth. Embracing yourself, hugging, holding yourself, inhaling in through your nose, exhaling out through your mouth. Yes. And so we are present. When we think about joy, I want to start by saying our positive emotions are better expressed and correctly perceived when they are communicated simultaneously through the face and the body. So we want to have an embodied joy, and we want it to come from a full-bodied place. When you have to suppress your joy, hide your joy, then it depletes and it decreases the impact of that joy, the benefit of that joy. And so I am hoping that you are in places, relationships, institutions, whereby you do not have to hide your joy. Our joy is an emotion of great delight and pleasure. And I invite you, even in this moment, to think about what and who brings you delight and pleasure. And I hope on that list of things that bring you delight and pleasure is yourself, that we can delight in the truth of ourselves, in the truth of our journey. Joy is a gladness that defies or is not dependent on circumstance. And so what that means is I do not have to be wealthy to have joy. I do not have to have my dream job in this moment to have joy. That I do not have to have everything going according to the plan and vision and dream that I had in order for me to have joy. And so it is defiant, it is radical, it is revolutionary, because in the midst of the various storms, I can see the storms and still have some joy in my life. It is an emotion caused by something exceptionally good. And that thing which is exceptionally good does not have to be an external circumstance, but it can be an internal reality. We can also think of joy as elation. Joy is good for us physically and emotionally. It can strengthen the immune system, decrease our stress hormones, improve our pain management, relieve our depression, promote a healthier lifestyle, support longevity, relax the facial muscles, and calm your nervous system, sending more oxygen to the brain and triggering the release of endorphins, can lower blood pressure and boost our mood. A manifestation of joy is laughter, and there is a science of laughter. The brain is releasing endorphins, our bodies are relaxing. People who you laugh a lot with, you feel more connected to. So it is a way of us building relationship and community, protecting our immune systems in the midst of all of the stress and the traumatic stress that we are carrying. Our laughter can protect against anxiety and depression. There's also a behavioral component of laughter whereby even if you start off with a fake laugh, your fake laugh can turn into a real laugh and reap the benefits of authentic laughter. When we hear other people laughing, even when we don't know what they're laughing about, it can cause us to laugh as well. And so there is a way in which we can bring joy into our lives and our relationships. So when we include in the title this notion of resistance, we would have to ask the question, who is it that is trying to steal your joy? And what is it that desires to steal your joy? We can be honest on today to say that there are peoples and systems that have organized themselves intentionally to attempt to steal our joy, that do not want you to be well, that do not want you to thrive, that do not want you to stand in your power, not only individually, but there are those who are thieves of joy collectively that do not want an entire body of people, an entire group of people to experience joy. And so we would say those who perpetrate violence are thieves of joy. Those who oppress, those who extract, those who manipulate, who bully, who colonize, who attempt to dehumanize, are desiring to take your joy. And so you can think about in your own life how that has shown up for you, personally, individually, and systemically. And so as you consider the various ways that people have tried to take your joy, you know that there are tactics involved and there are strategies involved. There are those who have directly targeted you. And so given the numbers that are here on today and what we know about our own statistics, we recognize that there are those who are present, who are survivors, survivors of childhood abuse, survivors of assault, harassment, intimate partner violence, survivors of racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, ableism, sizeism, religious intolerance. And so with all of these and more happening, it is a reality that not only may you have been targeted individually, but we are also present as survivors who have collectively been targeted, whereby your entire community has had their joy under attack. We also have the realities of vicarious traumatization, where you may not be a part of the group that was directly targeted, but because of your compassion and because of our heart or because of our affiliation with those who have been harmed, we can also feel the robbery of our joy, the intentional stealing of our joy, which is why to reclaim our joy is an intentional act of resistance. It is an intentional act that I will outlast the very institutions, systems, peoples, governments that are attempting to take my joy. And I make a decision, which is not an easy decision. It's a daily decision that requires my practice and my perspective and a community of support to be able to hold on to or to reclaim and recreate my joy. There are also internal barriers to your joy. Those of us who are trauma survivors or those who have experienced great loss often live with a fear of disappointment. And so you may brace yourself and always prepare for disaster. If I am perpetually preparing for disaster, then I don't get to embrace my joy. Because even when something good is happening, I'm afraid that it's going to be taken from me, or I'm afraid that something bad is going to happen. And so it is a reminder to ourselves, what are the ways that I am blocking my own joy because of my fear that it won't last? Then I don't actually get to enjoy the moment, the present reality, because of my fear of what will occur in the future. Similarly, those who have lived with the realities of poverty and scarcity can have a fear of enjoyment. And so there can be this idea that I must work and hustle and grind perpetually, because if I don't do that, I am going to end up in lack. And when I'm in that place, based on the trauma of classism, the trauma of poverty, then there is never enough. And so we can have the hoarding showing up. We can become workaholics and perfectionists because we're afraid that that which we have will be taken away. Some of us were also raised with this idea that you don't want to appear silly. And that may be related to family or culture. There's also messages around that with gender, of what people are told about manhood and masculinity. And so we often have to push past these socializing messages that have imprisoned our joy. There's also, for some people, the idea, the misbelief that you cannot have more than one emotion at the same time. And the reality is, you can feel more than one thing at the same time. So you may be grieving for the losses and the deaths and the violence and the oppression that are happening right now at this very moment, and still be able to have some joy with other aspects of your life. And so if I am locked into the idea that I can have no joy until everything in the world is going well, then I will spend a lifetime without joy. Because unfortunately, this work of justice is a lifelong commitment. It's not something that we're going to knock out this year, that by 2025, all will be well with everyone. But the joy instead fuels us to be able to show up for the justice work and for life. And I want to also name that there are those who are present and those you will work with who are dealing with survivor's guilt. And that may be on a very small personal level, where you're the person in your family who was able to get your degree or to get a reasonably good income. And you may have guilt about those who are not in that same place. It may be survivor's guilt beyond your family, but your community. It may be survivor's guilt for those who are of your same demographic, who are facing the atrocities in a much more intimate, personal, direct way. And so sometimes we hold ourselves hostage, even related to the grief of what does it mean for me to miss someone, for me to grieve someone, and yet give myself permission to still live, to give myself permission to grieve them and still choose to embrace life. And as I embrace life, create ways to cultivate my joy. So liberation psychology has an important connection with joy. Liberation psychology is birthed out of a critique whereby psychology often overemphasizes the individual and can disregard context, community systems of oppression. Liberation psychology is not only about eradicating oppression, but it is also about cultivating wholeness and wellness and flourishing and reimagining the possibilities for our lives, not only individually, but collectively. Liberation psychology is not only about reacting to the threats of oppression, but also about reclaiming one's identity and agency to live with purpose, meaning, community, and even joy. Liberation requires a rehumanizing that centers love, freedom, and joy. And so when we think about our justice work includes outrage, but outrage alone will not sustain us. And so there is love in our work. There is a freedom in our work. There is a joy in our work. In African decolonial methodologies, researchers both aim to disrupt colonialism and also to cultivate joy. And this is important as we think about post-traumatic growth, because often, unfortunately, we have focused on symptom cessation and have not talked about thriving, growth, flourishing. And so we recognize, especially those who do health psychology or trauma psychology, that health, wellness, wholeness is not just the absence of our depression, our PTSD, our anxiety, cutting behaviors, suicidal ideation. The absence of those alone is not joy. So we want to be intentional about the growth aspect of our journey. And so from a strengths-based approach, we adopt a mindset and a perspective, a framework that centers an individual or community's resources and strengths rather than only seeing people as a problem, as their presenting problem, or as their risk factors. Instead, we focus on enhancing strengths and resistance strategies that lead to joy, fulfillment, and wholeness. So I invite you to think about what brings you joy, and those of you who are practitioners to be intentional about creating space for joy in your sessions. I'm a trauma psychologist, and I remember I was sharing a suite with other therapists, and one of our neighboring therapists said to me one day, "I can't believe you're a trauma psychologist." And I said, "Why is that?" And she said, "I always hear so much laughter coming out of your office." And I said, "Of course, there's room for the tears, but there also has to be room for the joy, that as we are healing, we're honoring the fullness of our humanity, which is to say that my trauma affects me, but it doesn't define me, right? It has an impact, but there is more to me than what has been done to me. And there is more to our collective groups than what has been done to us. And so we want to see the wounds, but I don't want the wound to make all my decisions for me. Yes? And so there is joy in that. So how do we cultivate our joy? A part of a way you can cultivate joy is recognizing culture as medicine. And so there are cultural traditions, there are cultural rituals, there are cultural beliefs that can bring about your joy. For some of us, we come from an oral tradition as a person of African descent, and so we love to tell stories. And so those who can tell a good story, to hear a good story, that there is richness there, that there are proverbs that come with our culture, and the proverbs can help us to have joy and to reclaim joy. So White conducted a qualitative multinational study and found contributors to the experience of joy and awe, a sense of unity with all souls or interconnection, nature, spirituality, and the original self, connecting with your authenticity can bring your joy. Some of the components of joy that came out were freedom, humor, face-to-face communication, innocence, time, and space. And then there are categories that hinder our joy: family troubles, illness, political systems, globalization and consumerism, and the electronic childhood. So when we are stuck on these devices, they can take our joy. Childhood innocence and post-traumatic growth were personal variables that enhanced joy and awe. So for those who can look back and say, I had this like incredible, wonderful childhood, that can be a source of joy. But then those of us who our childhood and early years had difficulty, when we can see our own growth, that also can be a source of joy. Joy from a cultural framework can show up in your ideas around the supernatural or the spiritual, can show up in the ways in which your culture approaches notions of freedom. And joy can also show up in relationship to how your culture approaches sorrow and grief and even suffering. That when we think about getting through those things collectively, that in that collective space, joy can be present. Which speaks to our second joy bringer, which is community support. And so we think about, with all of the science on the vagus nerve, a piece around co-regulation, that in whose presence do you find joy? Who are the people that if you just look at your phone and see that that's who's calling, you get some joy? Or in their presence, even if you're on a quiet drive and you don't have to constantly talk, that there can be that sense of community support. Now, I want to name with community support, it is important that these relationships are bi-directional and that there is mutuality, because many of us may be the strong one in your family or the strong one in your community. And so you show up for others, but don't have people you can really lean on or be fully present with. But for it to be a joyful connection, we need there to be some transparency and authenticity. There's also this concept of appreciative joy, feeling happy for others with appreciation and not envy. It's associated with being able to live out of our values and having a sense of well-being. And this notion of appreciative joy is emphasized more in Chinese culture than North American culture. And so I invite you to think about who celebrates your wins and whose wins do you celebrate? When we talk about authentic connection and relationship, that these are those who want you to win and who rejoice with you in the things that bring about your joy. So they are not stuck in envy or jealousy or this competitiveness or this scarcity where only a few of us can have joy, but instead we want to obtain joy together. Another joy bringer is purpose. And so in this picture is Howard Thurman, who was a great African-American theologian. And he wrote these words: "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go and do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And so when I am flowing in my purpose, that can give me joy. And last year during the APA presidency, it was a very busy year, but it was also a joyful year because I could do a lot of initiatives that were in my heart to do. So I invite you to think about, as it relates to your work life or even your unpaid work, what are the things that make you come alive? And how can you create more space in your life to do the things that make you come alive? And that for many people can be a luxury. You know, generations before you may have said, I had to sacrifice my joy in order to provide for my family. And that sacrificial love, we see that across many cultures, generations, and communities. And I would invite you to think about what are the possibilities that I can lean into my purpose? What are the possibilities by which I can live doing more of the things that make me come alive? Another joy bringer in liberation psychology, there is a notion in liberation psychology therapy, testimonios, and in our Black church tradition, they would talk about a testimony service. And so to testify, we think about narrative psychology, which is what is the story you are telling yourself? And do you give yourself permission to tell the stories of the things you have survived? Sometimes we are stuck in shame and we do not speak about what we have survived. But when I'm stuck in shame, then that is blocking my joy. But instead, when I can look back over the various things that I have come through and be able to tell the story, and I like to say, shatter the shame, shatter the silence. Because when I feel I have to keep it a secret, I'm still holding shame about it. And when we connect this with justice, and liberation work, it includes telling the stories of how we survived racism, sexism, classism, xenophobia, the ways in which you have faced attacks on your abilities, attacks perhaps even on your own safety. And it may not just be you individually, but also collectively what it has meant to survive. And so in the face of anti-Black racism, I celebrate recognizing my ancestors making it through the transatlantic slave trade, making it through auction block and Jim Crow and segregation. I celebrate the ways in which we have survived and continue to survive. And so to enhance your joy, it is not just that I reflect and that I'm in a place of despair, but that I'm actually in a place of awe of the survival. I am in a place of awe of the thriving. And so I invite you to consider the testimony of your own journey and the testimony of the people who paved the way for you. That may be people in your own family. It may be distant ancestors. It may even be role models in the field, up close or from a distance, who you saw how they navigated spaces, and that gave you joy and strength to be able to navigate spaces as well. Another joy bringer are our spiritual practices, our ability to tap into or to connect beyond what is seen. When I am focused simply on what is seen, and what is seen is devastation, it can be very hard to have joy. And so it is an ability to see the sacred in the midst of it all. And so I invite you to consider in this moment, where do you see the sacred? And for some of you, that will be in nature. So you go out and hiking. For some of you, it is in the presence of children or elders. For some of you, it is in meditation or prayer. For some of you, it is reading a holy or inspirational text. For some of you, you have sought counseling from faith leaders or spiritual teachers. And so we get intentional, and I want to invite you, and you can share with your clients, those who are in practice, the gift of a morning ritual. The gift of a morning ritual. I used to work at a place that was we overused the word, but it was very toxic. And I came into the building one day, and the assistant director stopped me on the stairs, and she said, you know, Tama, you always seem so happy. And I get the feeling it has nothing to do with this place. And I told her, you're right. If I was dependent on this place for my joy, I would be a miserable person. And so I pour into myself before I show up into other spaces. And what your joy ritual will look like will be different from other people. And it might even be different now than what it might be 2 years from now. But to consider, how can I feed and nourish my spirit before I get out into the world? And so that may be a meditation app on your phone. It might be your theme song. Music therapy is real. You put that song on and it can shift your perspective. And so create our sacred morning rituals so that we can tap into our joy. And then there is joy in embodiment. May your joy not be dependent on your weight, appearance, or size. May it not be dependent on the lies you have been told about beauty. May it not be dependent on colorism or other people's ideas about your hair or about your eye color or about your hips. May it not be dependent on any of that. Those messages that try to convince us we are unworthy, even on a physical level, can be thieves of our joy. And so some people are literally saying, I'll have joy when I lose weight, or I'll have joy when my body looks like this, or I would have joy if my hair looked like theirs. And so from an intersectional feminist, womanist, and mujerista psychology's perspective that seeks to empower women and our non-binary sacred siblings to embrace your bodies joyfully while rejecting body dissatisfaction. And so embodied joy includes attunement, growth, liberation, and thriving. It is the active creation of environments that nurture your joy. So create spaces where there is social support that brings about an embodied sense of joy as opposed to a shame about your body or feeling that you have to hide your body. We want to enact joy in the context of resistance and struggle so that we resist external gazes, ideas from the media. In the media, there is an idea of what a leading lady looks like, or what someone looks like who is successful, or even what a president looks like. And so for you to deconstruct those notions and be able to problematize them and create your own resistance by being able to see and celebrate your beauty, your worthiness, that you belong in the positions in which you are, and that you have a critical political consciousness that allows you to see the ways in which you have been underestimated and disregarded, and that you intentionally do not align with those perspectives that seek to erase you. That we enact in a joy in the context of resistance and struggle that allows us to reclaim childhood experiences, that allow us to disrupt and reconnect, that allow us to create our own narratives that guide us not only toward our own liberation, but then that we reach back. That is the notion of Sankofa, the bird that is flying forward and reaching back so that others can get free with us. We also recognize that creativity can be a joy bringer. Your poetry, your music, your dance, your visual art. Just one example is the I Am More program that is culturally specific for Black youth, and it utilizes social, emotional skills and arts-based programming to help people, particularly Black youth, to transform their consciousness about themselves, to engage in activism, and to discover their voice and agency through art and creativity. And so your joy does not have to wait until adulthood to start, but for us to also be intentional with marginalized and minoritized youth to equip and empower them to be able to reclaim their joy. Our joy is collective. We get free together. And so there is this notion, you are my other me. You are my other me. And so in fact, working toward your justice also gives me joy. And we want to be intentional about working collectively and across these interwoven, interlocking systems of oppression. In other words, I don't have to be the direct target of it to speak up for it, or to speak up about it, or to work to create liberation, because you are my other me. What a joy it is when you experience people who are not of your same identity speaking up for your community. Is that not a delight? Because it's a heavy weight when you feel like, if I don't speak up, no one will. And so let us be a pleasant surprise for each other, that when we look up, we see that others are holding up our arms, and the others are speaking about the humanity and dignity of our communities. And so, finally, I want to offer an ancestral activation from my own community. There is a song that we often sing, the African American tradition, and it says, "This joy I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, the world can't take it away." And so whatever is trying to take your joy on today, I want to empower you. I want to activate you to outlast all of that, and know that you are deserving of your joy, that you are deserving of it. And so oppression does not have the final say. Violence and trauma do not have the final say. That collectively we reclaim a joy that is so deep and that is so sacred that it cannot be stolen. Thank you so much.
That was simply beautiful and amazing. And I hope you have an opportunity to take a look at the chat that is going on. It was brilliant. The medicine you gave us, the idea and gift you gave us to about reclaiming our joy. And it just really hit in terms of who's taking our joy away and the joy thieves. Just beautiful. I invite people that are participating to go ahead and drop your questions into the question function. We already have 2 questions, so I'll go ahead with the first one. So, Dr. Thema, how do you have the capacity and desire to share, hold on to, or rediscover your joy when the burdens get too heavy? That's an amazing question.
Yes, absolutely. What sustains us and what strengthens us? And I want to tell you all, I'm so moved. I'm in the chat and I see all your hearts and messages. So thank you. Um, my joy comes from multiple places. A part of it is, I'll say, my spiritual practice, and any justice work requires some level of faith and love, right? And the faith part is, it's not necessarily a religious faith for everyone, but a faith that we can be better than we are right now. Like, that's the only way that you can keep doing the work. And then I will say, training my eyes to see the small progress. Sometimes we're in such a place of despair. It's kind of like with depression. When you're depressed, all you can see is the bad. And so, and I understand that, I understand that. But as with the clients we work with, yeah, in order to keep moving, you have to be able to train your eyes to see what went well. What is the progress there? And some people may say, that feels surface or superficial, but that's how change works. It's not just the big aha moments, it's the little moments, right? It's the little moments. And then I will say, my community helps me a lot to having joy. So I have a sisterhood circle that meets once a month, and it's not labor, it's bi-directional and it's mutual. So be intentional about your relationships, so that you're not just pouring, but you're also receiving. And I think many people who enter the field, unfortunately, create a lot of one-sided relationships when they're off work, and there's no joy there. So mutuality and seeing the progress gives me joy.
That was brilliant and really hitting home the idea about mutuality. And I think that is so important and love how you frame that. We have a couple of questions about resources. One question that dealt with what resources in general do you find helpful in terms of your understanding of finding joy? And another for joy as resistance resources that you may have for organizational and institutional change. So, resources that you
Great.
would love to share with us.
Great, absolutely. And so I would say I mentioned the meditation apps, and there are a range of them. Liberate is an app that is by people of color for people of color. There are the other ones like Calm that people may be more familiar with. I want to say it's called Stop and Breathe. Stop, Think, and Breathe. I knew I was missing something. The thing I like about that one is it asks you questions first about how you're feeling in the moment, and then recommends a meditation, a short meditation based on that. There are lots and lots of books. I'll give a personal shout out. My book is Homecoming, and in June, the workbook is coming out called Reclaim Yourself. And then there are several podcasts that can be a place of nourishing as well. So my podcast is called Homecoming. I also want to give a plug. Dr. Shelley Harrell does work on soulfulness and also Sankofa theory, and she's currently offering communities and trainings. So if you just look up Shelley Harrell, that will give you a good possibility for that work as well.
Thank you so much. And Homecoming is so good. So if you don't have that book, definitely rush out and get the book. It speaks to so many folks, and that is a beautiful resource. We have another question here. It kind of builds on some of the things that you were just talking about, but definitely this idea about morning rituals. So, can you share some examples of how we may begin to cultivate morning rituals to survive oppressive environments specifically?
Yes, absolutely. And so the first thing I will say is your morning ritual needs to happen before you go on social media. Your morning ritual needs to happen before you turn on the news, right? Because it is how I am intentionally starting my day. And your morning ritual also means you need to wake up before you have to get up, right? Some people set their alarm for the time that they have to jump out of bed, and now you're already starting your day in panic, like you're already starting in this frantic space. And how is this radical or revolutionary for marginalized people? Well, for marginalized communities, particularly people of color and women, we have often been measured by our labor, right? That we have been taught our worth is in our ability to produce for other people. And so to start my day in my stillness or in feeding my spirit, it is a reminder to me that I am worthy of care. The truth is, we are often used to serving others. And I could say more about that, but I will say, you are not just a tool for other people's healing. You are not just a vessel to help other people attain wellness and liberation. That your wholeness, wellness, health, liberation, it matters too. And so then your morning ritual is what you are doing for you. And don't even add that tag on that I'm doing this so that I can serve people better. No, I'm doing this because I'm worthy of it. I'm worthy of it. And so you can have the music that you want to play. You find a book or sacred text that is inspiring to you, or poetry. You can read that in the morning. You can journal, which is a reminder of your own voice, because there are so many voices in your ear, and you want to get very clear so that I can discern the still small voice within me, because other people will have an agenda for your life. And if you're not careful, you'll make their agenda your agenda. And the next thing you know, you're a puppet. So when you don't want to be a puppet, you got to be clear about your voice. And the way you get clear about your voice is spending time with you and enjoying your own company. The last thing I'll say on that is spending time with you is not a punishment. You got to learn how to enjoy you. Have a good time by yourself. And then you can also have the community joy.
Oh, I feel like each one of these responses could be, we'd want to hear you talk for hours about that. But do have another question. And question is, what advice do you have on how to seek joy when authenticity is leading to a time of loneliness, isolation, and actually away from community?
Yes. So my joy, when my authenticity leads to isolation, my joy with that is now I'm living in truth. And so if when I reveal the truth of myself, if some people don't like me, I can welcome that because then we weren't really friends, right? This was not a real connection because I will say it's one of the things I had placed on social media. Some people only like their echo, right? Some people only like their clones. So they don't really like you. They like that you always agree with them. And so when you begin to speak truth, your truth, uh, it will lead to some disconnection. And I will say, while that can be painful, the mantra that I have is release to receive, release to receive. I release all false connections to make room for the real connections. I release spaces where I have to be silent because I'm creating spaces where I can speak. I release spaces where it is superficial or where I am not truly accepted. I release that. And I am creating spaces for kindred spirits to show up. There are people who are aligned with you, but if you spend all of your time trying to gain the approval of people who are really trying to break your spirit, you will not even be in position to meet the people who could actually do life with you. And so you can grieve it, and you're grieving more the familiarity than the reality of it. The reality of it is it was not nourishing, but you can grieve because some people will say it's better to have that than have nothing. And I feel that. I feel compassion for that. And I also say, I am excited for your willingness to walk alone as you walk toward the space where you can be real. That the loneliness is not permanent, but it is clearing the space and it is allowing you to know the truth of who you are so that you can get in the right company.
Remarkable words and this idea about authenticity, and you are living it, you are walking the walk, you are serving as a role model for authenticity and for embracing and cultivating joy. I feel as though that our conversation has just started, but it seems as though that our time has come to an end. I wanted to know if you had a few comments that you wanted to leave us with before we went on with the rest of our day.
Yes, I want to say that many of us, when we're stressed, we hold the tension in our bodies. And so I want to just raise again this notion of embodiment. I would call it kind of like micro self-care, that our care for ourselves doesn't just have to be these grand, expensive things, although, we can love those too. But taking breath, drinking your tea, stretching, calling people that those co-regulators, reaching out to people who give you joy. And I want to also, last thing I want to say is sometimes the things that give you joy may not be that deep, but your joy is important. So sometimes we create these self-care goals, like New Year's resolutions, that we approach as a punishment, right? And for some of you, your self-care activity might be watching your favorite show. You know, it may be laying in the bed on Saturday doing nothing. And especially for those with marginalized identities, uh, Stillness is a radical act, and you're worthy of it. We know how to hustle, we know how to labor, we know how to multitask. And in this season of your life, I hope you will enjoy the sacredness of your own stillness.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank everyone who has attended.